How is it going, you all? Welcome back to another Web Dev Junkie video. In this video, I'm going to basically just show you a quick overview of how you could do recursion to build out something like this. So this is kind of a real life example. Like, you know how if you look at your tree browser in your file system, like if you're on Windows, you go to My Computer, or Mac, if you go to your Finder, typically you have some type of structure like this, right? So this is a tree structure, and recursion is one way that you can kind of navigate a tree and maybe render it out to a page. And that is what we're kind of doing here with the kind of a not a perfectly structured tree setup, but it's a way to kind of simulate a tree. So I have an array here, and inside of this array we basically have either a string, which will represent the file or folder, and then if it's like a nested, like one level deep, we have a nested array. And you can keep on nesting these arrays. So example, if we have project, and inside that project folder we have package.json and a source, and inside source we have other.txt. You can see over here on the right we actually display those. So the whole goal of this video is to kind of give you an overview of how you can use recursion to display this. And you might say, okay, well, you're probably just using like ordered list or unordered list. If I look at the HTML here, there is none. This is all dynamically generated from the data that was represented in that array. So I think it's good to know this. And this is kind of an intermediate or advanced recursion topic. I think most recursion videos and tutorials talk about like using Fibonacci sequences, which those are cool, but they don't really give you a real example of how you can use recursion in a daily practice. You know what I'm saying? All right, so listen up. The code isn't that complex. I don't want to say that and like put people off, because if they're lost, then it's more complex. It doesn't seem like it's that complex to me, but it could be for you. But to display something like this, recursion is a great technique that you can use to kind of navigate that nested tree structure, okay? And to do so, let me just walk you through the code. Hopefully a walkthrough is okay with you all. I don't know if you want me to see me like live code this, but I think a walkthrough should hopefully be good enough. But basically I have one recursive function called drawFiles, and I'm calling it down here. So I'm passing that array of arrays into this drawFiles, and that is what is drawing out this thing on the right. So to give you an overview of why this is recursion, well, if you look at the function and the internals of the function, you'll see that I'm calling drawFiles inside of the function here. Okay, so recursion is that whenever you have a function that calls itself, that's a recursive function, okay? Now, the second thing I want to point out about recursive functions is that they usually always have a base case. So that is the statement that says, okay, stop traversing recursively and just return out or break out of the loop. I shouldn't say loop, there is no loop, but you know, stop going deeper into the call stack and just return. So our base case here is basically if we've hit a string, then we no longer need to recursively dive down into the data structure, and instead we can just create a text div. I'll show you this in a second. We can just create some text and put it on the screen. But if we did happen to find an array, what we want to do is loop through all the elements of the array, and for each element that we find, we call drawFiles one more time with the file that we found, which could be a string or an array. So this file variable right here, this could be a string or it can be an array, okay? So keep that in mind. We just basically keep looping through the array. We go a level deep, we loop through that array, we go a level deep, we loop through it again. And the second thing I'll show here is every time we go deeper into the array, we increment the depth by 1. And that is basically so that what's this complaining about? Broke something. All right, so this right here, the reason we go depth plus 1 is so that we know how far to indent these nested files or folders. Okay, so every time we recursively call drawFiles, we just increment the depth, and then we use that depth when we're creating the div. So the second thing I'll show you is this create indented file function. All this does is it creates a div, it adds some margin left based on the depth or the indent level, and then we set the text equal to whatever the file was called, so like home or my script.py, and then we append it to the body. right? So that's, if you're familiar with doing DOM manipulation in JavaScript, this should be kind of straightforward. But the recursive part that's kind of confusing is this, okay? So I wish I had this in VS Code and I kind of show you like a walkthrough, but what I'm going to do is just try to highlight this all out. If you're not already super confused, I'm going to try to walk through it, and hopefully you guys got something from this little video. So how this works is I basically pass this entire array to our recursive function, and it's going to check, did I pass in an array or did I pass in a string? Well, in this case, I passed in an array, so it's going to do a for each over all those items in the array and call draw files on each element. Okay, so at that point, we're going to call draw files on this. We call draw files with this, with this, with this, etc. So hopefully that makes sense. So for the first recursive call, we're passing in the home string, and that is going to hit our base case where we basically just create a div with 0 indentation and we print it out to the screen. But then we get to this one for our second recursive call, and that happens to be an array. So we're going to call draw files on that string and draw files on that string. Again, those would be strings, so it's going to hit the base case and just basically create a div for requirements and a div for my script py. Then it's going to go up one more in the stack, and then look at this one. It's going to print out project. It's going to do a recursive call on this, recursive call on this, and print out package, print out source. It sees an array, so it needs to do a recursive call on that array, which happens to find a string, and then print that out, etc. And so I hope you kind of understand how this kind of works behind the scenes. To be honest with you, I probably just confused you. This recursive example was probably more advanced than just doing a Fibonacci sequence example, but I think it helps it click more when you're actually seeing like a realistic output. Because honestly, who cares about Fibonacci numbers? All right, so some final thoughts. Recursion is a great way, an elegant way to traverse trees or graphs. And by that, I mean like the data structures, tree data structures, graph data structures, binary trees, anywhere where there's like a data structure that maps out to other data structures. Recursion is a great way to do it. Of course, you can always do the iterative approach with like a while loop and a queue or something. You can just do, I don't know, like breadth first search or something like that. But I don't know. I hope this was a good overview. If not, give me a thumbs down and tell me to dumb it down for you all, and I will make another recursive JavaScript tutorial in the future doing Fibonacci or something that's a little bit more easier to digest. All right, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Happy coding.